You know how biopics of real people will sometimes at the end of the movie put up text on screen to let you know what became of the people, and they'll put up real photos and imagery of the person. I enjoy watching all of that stuff because after watching a movie about a person played by an actor, particularly a good performance, it's always fun to make an additional connection to the person by seeing what they actually look like compared to the actor that was portraying them, and also seeing photos of events that were depicted in the movie. Well, they do that for this movie as well, and I definitely sat through all of this because after sitting through this 2-hour movie, I didn't feel like I got the complete story about the central character. The Smashing Machine is about Mark Kerr, who, as I understand it, was one of the pioneers of the UFC and MMA fighting sports. Also, the movie, as I understand it, is based on a documentary entitled Smashing Machine: The Life and Times of Extreme Fighter Mark Kerr. The movie stars Dwayne Johnson as Kerr, and I'll say off the bat, this is Dwayne Johnson's best performance to date. Now, given that Johnson made a career out of being a fighter and a wrestler, playing a fighter and a wrestler is not the biggest stretch. But no, for real, it's an admirable performance. Is his performance worth the Oscar buzz that's going around? I'm going to be honest, no. That's my opinion. But he has a couple scenes where he brings it. A couple of scenes that call for him to cry. And he does a convincing job of expressing grief, although I couldn't help but notice he covered his face both times. Whenever I see that, that's an indication that the actor couldn't produce real tears, so they cover their face. All right, let me stop. Let me let up on him, okay? There are a couple scenes where he is under the influence of narcotics, and I'll tell you what, he does a really good job of portraying a totally zoned out guy who seems like he's on another planet. The prosthetics that are applied to his face were occasionally distracting to me, but after a while, they and Johnson disappeared into the character. Well, that is, until he shaves his head in the third act, and there's no prosthetics in the world, not enough in the world, that could not make me see The Rock when he shaves his head and he's bald. Plus, Johnson is such a larger-than-life presence, if for no other reason than the guy is freaking huge in this movie. It does take time not to see The Rock. I had to suspend disbelief on a number of occasions, particularly whenever they showed Johnson in comparison with any opponent that he was fighting as the character Mark Kerr. Johnson's size made it hard to believe that anyone could stand up to him. Emily Blunt, well, I haven't seen a lot of her movies, but every time I see her, she's convincingly playing a very different character. I primarily identify her most with the badass character she played in Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise. But from that film to A Quiet Place to Oppenheimer, she just morphs into a totally different and believable character each time, which makes her a very talented actress. In this movie, she plays Dawn Staples, Mark Kerr's girlfriend. What I liked about her character is that she isn't easily pinned down. Typically, in these movies, there's always one person that we're meant to sympathize for and one person we're meant to say, oh, she or he is the bad guy, not to put too fine a point on it. Well, she and Mark alternate between being a loving couple and being totally toxic. And by the way, they both convincingly portray both scenarios very convincingly on screen. Watching her in those toxic moments, you sympathize with her as Mark engages in destructive behavior, but then you see her toxic behavior spring up out of nowhere. And suddenly you're like, oh man, all right, you're part of the problem too. This is a two-way street, definitely. But I like the fact that between them, there was not one clearly defined character to root for and one to hate. Now, a trivia note, when I was doing a little research for this movie to do this review, I discovered there's a movie that I didn't bother to see. I think it's a Disney movie that Emily Blunt and Dwayne Johnson both appeared in. This would be 2021's Jungle Cruise. So just a fun fact. There are a couple other amazing performances that I thought were great. Ryan Bader, he plays Mark Coleman, who is, I'm assuming the word is, not was, who is Mark Kerr's best friend, whom he potentially has to face in the ring in this movie. Ryan Bader is so natural and feels so comfortable in the role. I assumed Bader, who's also a professional UFC and MMA fighter, was the real Mark Coleman, who just happened to be a pretty good actor. But when I looked up this guy, Bader, I didn't see any credit for this movie, and he deserves a lot of credit for this film. He really is he's one of the great performances in this movie. And I'm going to try to pronounce this guy's name. I'm going to go with Baz Rutten. I don't know if that's correct. This guy plays Mark Kerr's trainer, and actually this guy trained the real Mark Kerr, and this guy is also totally natural, amazing in front of the camera. Both these guys are truly awesome, and they kind of make the film enjoyable to watch. And enjoyable, I use that term loosely, but they make it seem real. Their performances just seem very real. Now, the problem I have with this film is that I just felt like something was missing from it. I didn't feel like the film digs deep into the weeds enough to create an impact about Mark Kerr's struggles with addiction, struggles with his insecurity, and his road to recovery. A lot of biopics make the claim that the events you're about to see are based on real events, and you know that the filmmakers augmented some of the events for dramatic effect. This movie could have used a lot more of that. The film is directed by Benny Safdie, who also directed Daddy Long Legs and Uncut Gems. Now, I will admit I haven't seen either of those movies. I know of both of them, and I need to see Uncut Gems because I understand it's a great performance by an actor and comedian that I don't find very entertaining. That would be Adam Sandler, but I'm hearing it's a great performance, so I do want to see it. Now, here with this movie, the filmmaking is just so subtle that it kind of just lays there. Then there's conflict, and then the film just lays there. Then there's conflict, and then the movie just again lays there. So, yeah, there's conflict throughout the movie, but I needed more punch to make me feel the stakes and the build-up to the scenes of conflict when they appear. Outside of those scenes, most of the film plays like just a Super 16 home movie reel that just captures what happens in real life, but there doesn't seem like there's a lot of payoff for what we see. Not spoiling anything, but one example is early on in the movie, I think it takes place in the first act, Mark is fighting in a pride competition that takes place in Japan. A lot of his early fights were in Japan. And there's a scene where he is in I'm not going to say confrontation, but he's trying to negotiate, or he's trying to emphasize to the promoters that he did not receive the amount of money that they agreed upon. And the promoters are like, well, that's all we can pay. There are a couple of Japanese businessmen. He said, well, this is not what we agreed to. And the two guys are like, okay, we'll talk to the higher ups and see what we can do. So I'm thinking, well, this must be a plot point. This is what the movie must be about, him getting cheated and not getting his fair due. They don't come back to that scene at all. We never hear anything else about that conflict. Basically, it's awesome for a guy in real life to realize that he's addicted to drugs, then have the wherewithal to check himself into rehab, and then go through the program and come out and live a clean and sober life. That's awesome. But I'm going to need a little more than that for your story to be interesting enough for me to go and watch on the big screen. I do need a little bit of a Hollywood punch-up to make it larger or broader than just real life. And that's how a lot of this film presents the narrative. It's almost too laid back, with the exception of some explosive moments that seemingly come out of nowhere. There's a little resolution, but it just seemed like there's not enough to justify how we got to that moment of conflict or that moment of explosion. Another example, there's one moment in the third act between Mark and Dawn that takes an extremely shocking turn, and it's so shocking mostly because there was very little build-up to the moment. I also have to say the resolution to Mark's arc is virtually non-existent, almost a cop-out. I mean, it's almost to the point where we see other characters that seem like they're carrying on the story that maybe should have been focused on for the whole film. It's like, well, if that's how Mark's story is going to end, if that's how you're going to conclude his arc, maybe we should have been following this guy over here. But there is a built-in element of excitement, no doubt, because this is a story, after all, about a guy who competes in a sport where people get their heads smashed in. But when the story moves out of the ring, it's so uneven in those non-conflict scenes, I ultimately asked the question, what made this particular guy, what made his story, what made Mark Kerr's story any more worthy of the big screen treatment than any of these other fighters? The movie also makes some eclectic musical choices. The music ranges from jazz to pop to classic ballads. I actually kind of like this, particularly when you've got a scene with two fighters in the ring, and rather than using a music cue that you would expect to sound like something from the Rocky movies, you get a bit of light jazz. But for whatever reason, that worked for me. It kind of kept me off kilter, and it kind of got me excited to see, okay, what story is this thing going to land on? This music is telling me something sounds like it's not right, which is great. So how is this going to get resolved? And it would just, like I kept saying, lay there. The two leads in this movie, Dwayne Johnson and Emily Blunt, they do a fantastic job, with Emily Blunt deserving a Best Supporting Actress nomination. The scenes between Emily Blunt and Dwayne Johnson are great. The fight scenes are lively, even if they become repetitious. I loved Ryan Bader's performance as well as Baz Rutten, but ultimately, I'm giving this film 2.5 reels. If this movie did anything outside of providing two great performances from its leads and two great performances from a couple of people who portrayed natural characters, some of whom were real-life people acting in this movie, I would say the one thing this movie gave me was a desire to go see the documentary about Mark Kerr, where I could probably learn a lot more about that character and that real person. Okay, guys, that's all I got for you right now. I believe the next film I'm going to review is probably going to be Tron Ares. Before I go, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and with that, I will see you again soon. Take care, guys.